morning, Mr. Pretorius. Good morning, Mr. Zuma. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chair.
Are we ready?
Yes, we are. I need to report back, Chair, in relation to documents. I understand that there is no substantial issue in relation to documents any longer. It's acknowledged that all but 2 documents were received last year. The 2 documents in question are the statement of Mr. Mbalula. No 3-3 was issued in relation to that document, and therefore it was not sent last year, but was sent this year. I will delay questioning on that until the end in order to accommodate my learned friends and Mr. Zuma in relation to possible preparation. The second document is the second statement of Mr. Griese, which was also not sent by way of a 3-3 notice because of the consideration that it failed to implicate the President, certainly directly, and I don't intend to ask any questions about that statement as at present advised.
Yes. Okay. I think Mr. Zuma wishes to say something.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just thought I should put on record something for us to know.
Yes.
Yesterday night between 7 and 8, my PA that from the ANC side was phoned by a person she does not know. And this person said, "You must tell Zuma that we are going to kill him. We'll also kill his children, as well as some people around him." So she informed me this morning. And I'm sure, Chair, you recall that I said a lot about how my life has been attempted. But also, my senior counsel, Advocate Skakane, this follows threats that have been made to him, very serious ones as well. In a short while, about a week or so ago, we received that. Putting this on record because later, at some point after the questions, I would like to come back to this issue.
Yes.
Because I have lost a child, and I now know what happened. So the threat, I can say it has been implemented already. But I would like to come back to that. I just thought for record, this commission must know that my life and my children, my lawyers are now under threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I say anything, I wonder whether Mr. Skakane wants to say anything. Nothing. Okay. Ordinarily, in response to what you have just told me, Mr. Zuma, with regard to other witnesses, I would urge the Commission to take necessary steps to ensure that a witness who is giving evidence before the Commission gets all the protection that they can give. What I don't know is whether by virtue of your position you don't already have maximum protection. I don't know whether there is anything beyond what the protection you get that the Commission can add. I think maybe your legal team could be in touch with the Commission's legal team, because if there is anything that the Commission can do, it should be done. I was simply saying it may well be that the protection that you have is far greater than whatever protection the Commission could hope to provide. But having said that, I just want to say this, that it is totally unacceptable for anybody in our society to want to use violence, intimidation, and all kinds of illegal means when they are unhappy about anybody, because our legal system is such that people can go to courts, can go to the police if they have complaints against other people. It is totally unacceptable that any threats should be made to anybody, and more so when those threats are made to or concerning a person who is giving evidence before this commission. I said similar things some time ago when certain threats were made against a certain witness who gave evidence here. I say the same thing today. It's unacceptable. People who come to the commission to give evidence and help the commission to understand matters that it is investigating should not be threatened, should not be intimidated. Their families should not be threatened or intimidated or harmed in any way. And all good people in this country must take a stand against the use of violence and intimidation. I'm happy that whatever threats have been made haven't made Mr. Zuma to change his mind about giving evidence. He's still going to continue and give evidence before this commission. But it will be important that all steps be taken by relevant authorities to make sure that the threats he has reported are properly investigated and that they are not carried out. I also want to address the threat against his counsel. One of the traditions of the bar is that advocates represent anyone and everyone who needs legal representation. And when lawyers represent their clients, they are just doing their job. And they should not in any way be threatened or intimidated or be discouraged from representing whoever they choose to represent. Everybody deserves to be represented by a lawyer when they are in proceedings, in legal proceedings. And it is important that, as far as possible, everyone should get the lawyer of their choice. So any threats that have been made against Mr. Zuma's counsel or any lawyer is totally unacceptable, because in this commission, I want every lawyer to feel free to come and represent their clients. I would ask that whatever assistance the legal team of the commission can provide, if Mr. Zuma's counsel needs any arrangements to be made for his protection, that everything be done to assist in that regard. I don't want a situation where a lawyer is supposed to come and represent somebody in this commission is no longer able to come and represent them because of threats. So I thought I would just make those remarks, and I hope everything will be taken care of. But before we proceed, I had meant to just make one remark, and that is that I thought that the proceedings yesterday were characterized by respect, courtesy, and cooperation from all sides. From the Commission's legal team, the former President's legal team, the former President, as well as everybody who was attending. And I thought I must just acknowledge that. Indeed, even with regard to those who were outside the venue, I did not get any reports of incidents. The reports I got seemed to suggest that there was a high level of discipline, and I hope that today and in the days to come this week, everything can proceed in that way. Thank you. Mr. Zuma, I thought I must also say, should a need arise as it happened yesterday to wash hands, please feel free to indicate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Otherwise, the next break will be 11:40. Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to what has been said this morning, may we just add that the Secretariat has an investigative capacity. The issues raised by former President Zuma are a matter of regret, firstly, and concern, secondly. And we will ensure that, as previously, where it has happened before in this commission, the matter is fully investigated, and insofar as we can assist in any way whatsoever, at least with advice around our experience in the Commission in regard to protection or protection itself, both in relation to Mr. Sekakane and former President Zuma, it will be done. And we'll report back to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Zuma, we will, with your leave, still be dealing this morning for a while at least with the evidence of Mr. Maseko and your response or version in respect of the issues that he raises. And we were on page 7 of the bundle, FP, JGZ 7.
We are still using Exhibit GGA.
Yes, it's bundle A.
Exhibit
GGA.
Exhibit GGA.
GGA.
Did we enter these exhibits into the record yesterday?
I'm sorry, Chair.
Did we enter these exhibits into the record yesterday?
Yes, we did. But there's no harm in repeating for the sake of efficiency, particularly in relation to documentation, Chair, that we're dealing with two bundles.
To the extent that we might not have done so, the Liver Arch file, which contains Mr. Zuma's statement, is to be marked Exhibit GGA, and the other Liver Arch file, which has got certain annexures in addition to the annexures that are in Exhibit GGA, will be marked Exhibit GGB. Thank you.
Yes, they do not, just a minor point, contain any statement of the former president, but they do contain statements relevant to the questioning this week.
No, actually, I think what I said was wrong, because it doesn't contain his statement.
Correct.
I'm going to correct what I said in regard to the Liver Arch file that will be marked Exhibit GGA. It doesn't contain any statement by Mr. Zuma, but it contains statements of certain witnesses, and the first statement on the top is that of Mr. Themba Mveli, James Maseko. And the other Liver Arch file, Exhibit GGB, contains other statements, including that of Ms. Barbara Hogan. That one of Ms. Barbara Hogan is one on top on the other Liver Arch file. Thank you.
That by way of introduction, Mr. Zuma, may we go to page 7 and paragraph 32. The next...
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. Before we do that, Mr. Zuma, I just want to clarify something that your counsel mentioned yesterday. In terms of your ability to read the words in the document, I think he was expressing a concern that they may be too small. Are you able to read this fine?
It's very difficult. It's small.
They are small.
I try to strain my eyes, but
they are small.
It's very small.
Maybe you might, as far as you can, Mr. Pretorius, read to him what is necessary for your question, and if there's not enough for him to get the context, we can take it from there.
In the meanwhile, I'll try and arrange from the Secretariat for enlarged copies.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
By way of background to the next section of the evidence of Mr. Maseko, Mr. Zuma, Mr. Maseko testified that around the end of November 2010, he was driving to the northwest on a personal journey, and he received a phone call from an unknown person who said he worked for the Gupta Media Company. And that gentleman requested a meeting with Maseko the following Monday in order to discuss government advertising in the soon-to-be launched New Age newspaper. By way of introduction, it seems that what follows was a second attempt to persuade Mr. Maseko to divert or cause business to be given to the New Age newspaper by way of government advertising. But that by way of background. Was any report against the background that the Guptas would have known that you had an interest in this project, in fact, it was initiated by yourself, as I understand from what you said yesterday. The financing of the project clearly would have been a concern to the Guptas. Did they report to you any concerns about their inability to persuade Mr. Maseko to assist them?
No, they never.
Then, if we look further down on page 7, in short, what happened was that Mr. Maseko put the caller off. He said, look, we'll discuss it on Monday. But then an hour later, and I'm at paragraph 35 on page 7, the phone rang again. That's Mr. Maseko's phone. This time it was Mr. A.J. Gupta. He sounded very agitated, and he started the conversation with an aggressive tone. He said, and I'm now over the page on page 8, he said his people told him that I was being difficult. I told him what happened in the conversation with his staff member. Paragraph 37 reads, he, that is Mr. A.J. Gupta, then responded by saying something to the effect that he will not tolerate any nonsense and that I didn't understand what was going on. He said the meeting must happen on Monday morning. It seems that from what Mr. Maseko said, the response was equally forceful. Mr. Maseko says in paragraph 38, I was extremely offended by what was going on and the manner in which he spoke to me. I told him he had no right to give me instructions as he was not my employer. His response was that the meeting must no longer take place on Monday morning as they had initially demanded, but should happen the following morning, which was a Saturday. I told him how ridiculous his demand was and that I was out of town for the weekend. He insisted that the meeting will take place on the Saturday morning. The evidence of Mr. Maseko continues then in paragraph 39. Mr. Maseko says, I told him in no uncertain terms that I will not be spoken to in that manner, nor dictated as he was attempting to do. In the process, and reflective of my annoyance at an attempt to improperly bully me as a government official, I also used an expletive. And then Mr. Maseko reports a further statement by Mr. Gupta to him. At this point, he told me that I was being uncooperative and that he was going to speak to my seniors in government who would sort me out and replace me with people who would cooperate with him. I can't recall whether he or I dropped the call. The call ended abruptly. He says in paragraph 42, on my return to Johannesburg the following week, I briefed Minister Chabani about the developments. At that stage, let's remind the Chair, who was Minister Chabani?
Sorry?
Who was Minister Chabani at that stage? What post did he hold?
He was a minister in the presidency.
In the presidency?
Yes.
And Mr. Maseko says he reported it to him. Now, Minister Chabani would have known, surely, that you were in favor of the progress of the New Age project, would he?
No, I hadn't discussed that with with the ministers. As I say, I discussed this with the Secretary General and the Deputy. It was not a matter of government. He might have known, he might not have known, I don't know. I hadn't discussed it with Shaban.
As I understand your evidence then, Mr. Zuma, you say that you saw a need for fair and objective and comprehensive publicity and newspaper reporting, and as part of that you discussed with the Gupta's, at least the New Age project for now, the ANN 7 project came later, and that you didn't discuss that with the minister in the presidency?
No, I didn't discuss that.
Would it not be something that you would discuss ordinarily?
Sorry?
Would it not be something that one would have expected such a thing to be discussed with the minister in the presidency if it was a matter that concerned you as president?
No, this was not a government thing. This was done by business people out there.
Was it a private arrangement, not government?
No. I never said government was involved here.
Right.
I think I made the point very clear. I informed the Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General because they are ANC. This had nothing to do with the government insofar as our discussions were concerned.
All right, so if I may understand, then your interactions with the Gupta family, certainly insofar as the New Age newspaper and its establishment were concerned, was done in a capacity other than a government capacity, not as president.
I can't, I'm not sure what
Well, not as head of the executive. You say it had nothing to do with government.
No, why I'm saying so, because we are asking a question as if I should have discussed it with the minister.
Yes.
No, so I'm saying the minister, that did not feature in my activities, as I say.
Yes.
Because this was not a government project.
Yes, that's as I understand it.
Yes.
So how would you categorize the project then? Private? Party political?
No, this was a private project,
yes,
by business people.
Thank you.
I think what he may be seeking, Mr. Zuma, is to establish whether from your side, when you were speaking to the Guptas about this project, you were speaking to them just as a private citizen or as president of the ANC, because I think it's clear from what you have said you were not speaking as president of the country.
You mean
when you spoke to the Guptas about the New Age project?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think what Mr. Pretorius is trying to establish is whether from your side you were speaking to the Guptas about this project in your personal capacity,
yes.
or in your capacity as president of the ANC, because you have made it clear it was not in your capacity as president of the country. Is that correct?
I discussed with them
Yes.
from a personal capacity.
From a personal capacity.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
We may come back to that issue in relation to another matter arising in the statement of Mr. Maseko, but for the moment, what is apparent from the statement of Maseko, Mr. Maseko just read to you, is that the Guptas were, to put it mildly, quite forceful in their request or demand to Mr. Maseko. That so much is apparent. Do you agree?
Well, if you read what is here,
Yes,
I think that's what it shows.
indeed. And it seems too that Mr. A.J. Gupta at least was very confident of support within government. What he says is, and this is what Mr. Maseko's version is, at this point he, Mr. A.J. Gupta, told me I was being uncooperative and that he was going to speak to my seniors in government who would sort me out. He appeared to be confident that he had the support of his seniors in government who would, quote, sort me out and replace me with people who would cooperate with them. That much is also apparent from what Mr. Maseko said. That now, would a as far as you are aware, insofar as the project is concerned, do you know whether Mr. Gupta was justified in saying that he had government support?
I'm not sure whether I should really interpret people's mood and how they addressed one another. Because it is here from Mr. Maseko, who discussed this with Gupta.
Yes.
Now, how do I interpret them? I think the trend has been that we are actually saying I should be saying something on interactions that I was not part of.
No, I understand that, and you make a good point. My question, though, had a different object, and let me rephrase it. The factual question that I ask is, did Mr. Gupta enjoy, as he appears to have said he did, government support in the New Age project?
I don't know, really.
You don't know?
Because I've never participated in a discussion that discussed that matter with government people.
Maybe one could put it this way. From what Mr. Maseko has said in his statement, if what he says is true, it appears that Mr. Ajay Gupta believed that if Mr. Maseko did not cooperate, he could get Mr. Maseko's seniors to sort him out, to use that word. Maybe let's start with who Mr. Maseko's seniors would have been in government. Would it have been the minister in the presidency? Would that be correct?
Yeah, definitely.
That would be correct.
That would be correct.
And above the minister, it would be the president.
Yes.
Yes. Is there anything you know which would have made Mr. Ajay Gupta, if what Mr. Maseko is saying is true, which would have made him believe that if Mr. Maseko didn't do what he wanted him to do, he could talk to Mr. Maseko's seniors to sort him out? Is there anything you know on the basis of which Mr. Ajay Gupta could really say that?
No, I don't know.
All right. He goes on, Mr. Zuma, on page 9, in paragraph 43, to say, "This matter was of great concern to me, especially when I started receiving complaints from heads of communication from other departments complaining that they were being harassed by people from the New Age newspaper who were demanding either meetings or advertising budgets." Do you know anything about complaints of heads of communication from other departments complaining of harassment at the hands of the New Age newspaper?
No, I didn't get that.
Right. But again, it's evident that the New Age project under the Guptas, if Mr. Maseko's evidence is accepted, was being vigorously pursued. Did they ever report back to you on this? Did you have meetings with the Guptas about the progress of the New Age project?
Well, from time to time, they briefed me.
Right. And would they have briefed you about how the financing of the project was to be achieved? It would seem a fairly reasonable assumption to make. No.
No.
What did
They were just
brief you
briefing
about?
me on the progress they were making.
And what type of progress would that have been then?
Establishing that business, the newspaper, as it were.
But you say not the financing.
No, not the financing.
All right. The next section of the evidence that we would like your comment on, Mr. Zuma, is under the heading, My Exit from the Public Service.
Maybe before that, if what Mr. Masego says Mr. Ajay Gupta said to him, namely, I will speak to your seniors to sort you out, and bearing in mind that you have indicated that Mr. Masego's seniors would have been the minister in the presidency, and above the minister it would be the president. If what Mr. Masego says Mr. Ajay said is true, would you agree that then Mr. Ajay Gupta would have been abusing whatever relationship or friendship he may have had with Mr. Masego's seniors in order to try and get government work?
Well, I wouldn't be able to answer the question correctly because I really don't know what made Mr. Mr. Ajay to say that. The senior that on operational matters, the immediate senior and who deal with all of these things would be the minister, not the president, be the minister. That's why Masego would go to the minister and report the kind of treatment that he has got from an individual. And it ends there. I'm just making a point that you can't have the president participating in those kind of discussions in all departments.
But are you not able to say, we don't know Mr. Ajay Gupta's version. It might be different from Mr. Masego's version. But that is why I say, if what Mr. Masego is true, are you not able to say, if what Mr. Masego says was said by Mr. Ajay Gupta is true, that would have been improper?
Yes.
Are you able to say that?
No, I'm able to say so.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You did say, Mr. Zuma, that these sorts of matters would not be discussed with a president, but you have also said the matters were indeed discussed privately.
Yes.
Some matters were discussed privately.
Yes.
So
I said so.
the Guptas might have felt free to discuss these issues with you in your private capacity, as you've already said.
If they discuss anything with him, we did not discuss the operational things.
Paragraph 47, if I may read it to Mr. Zuma, says, towards the end of January 2011, I received a call from the Minister Chabani asking me to meet him at his office urgently. I met him at his office the following morning. At the meeting, he advised me that he had been instructed by the President to redeploy me or terminate my contract henceforth. If I may ask, we know that at around this time, Mr. Maseko did actually leave certainly the post that he held at the time as CEO of GCIS. We know that as a fact. Is that agreed?
Yes, I think he left around that time.
And I don't want to go into the detail of the law with you, but as I understand it, if Mr. Maseko was transferred, as he was, to another department, the law says that would be your decision. Do I understand correctly?
It would be, yes, it would be the decision taken in the main between what would have happened. The minister would have briefed the president. because the DGs are actually deployed by the cabinet, That type of a report will therefore be given to or reflected in the government, but the ministers would have discussed that with the president. They come because of whatever to say, Mr. President, this is what I'm doing. And if the president thinks that this is unfair or whatever, would say, but why? They'll have to explain. If the explanation, at times the explanation might not even be satisfying, but if the minister says, look, I just can't work with this DG, it happens all the time. You can't force the minister. So say, okay, proceed, and then follow the process.
So in the ordinary course, as required by law, you would have participated in any decision regarding a DG in the Department of the Presidency?
In
the Presidency.
Just repeat, I don't know whether I'm getting you.
Just repeat the question, I think.
We dealt with this matter yesterday, but it's as well to clarify, Mr. Zuma. As the head of GCIS, Mr. Maseko worked in the Department of the Presidency, correct?
Yeah.
Which fell under yourself at the time. And the minister then was Minister Chabani. So in any decision about the termination of service of Mr. Maseko, or in relation to his transfer, you would have been consulted.
Definitely.
Right.
Not just by the minister in the presidency only. All ministers.
Right. Okay.
All ministers.
Okay. Well, Mr. Maseko's evidence is that Mr. Chabani told him that he had been instructed by the president to redeploy me or terminate my contract henceforth. What do you say about that statement?
No, I never instructed the minister to do so.
Did you discuss the issue with the minister?
No, the minister discussed the fact that he would like to transfer Mr. Maseko.
Did he say why?
Well, I think there was an issue between the two of them. I can't remember the details. Like all ministers, he would come for us to be able to either agree so that an action is taken, not to discuss, if at all there were issues which were necessary to be said, because it's a big decision, he will indicate that. That is because of this and that. Or because...
Just finish before I say something.
Because either we can no longer work together, or because we don't agree, or because I think I don't need him anymore, whatever. The discussion would, because he can't take a decision to change the DG without, because that is not his decision.
Well, I think with the time that we are talking about, when Mr. Maseko was moved from the position of CEO of GCIS and was moved to be Director General of the Department of Public Service and Administration, was around 2011, end of January or thereabout. Have you got a recollection of how that happened? I've got the picture of how that happened.
That specific...
specific incident of his, whether one can call it a removal from GCIS to Public Service and Administration, or a transfer from GCIS to Public Service Administration, Public Service and Administration. Do you recall how that occurred? obviously having read Mr. Masego's statement and understanding what his version is.
Well, I don't remember exactly, but I know that there was a bit of shifting of the DGs around that time.
Yes, yes.
And the department that handles that is public administration, who will then discuss with the ministers
Yes,
on whatever reasons.
yes,
And then once that happens, and that will then be reported
yes,
once it becomes a decision to the cabinet.
yes.
I might not remember the details why this happened, but I know there was a movement that was
Yes,
done.
Yes, yes,
But I can't remember exactly what was the cause. At times, the changes come because either a DG could perform better in one place, and therefore he must go and help there, and another one is replaced. But I can't remember exactly what, on this particular DG, what was the problem. But that matter would have been discussed more in some details at a level of the minister and the Minister of Public Administration.
Public Service and Administration.
Once they're agreed, they will then come with a recommendation. They generally come with a recommendation unless if there's a problem. For an example, if they can't work together, or if they think this particular DG would perform better there. And once they report, they say, we've discussed the matter, we've agreed. And then the cabinet will take a decision.
When you read Mr. Masego's statement, did you see what he says happened with regard to that, with regard to his removal? He says he was told by Minister Chabane that you had called from outside of the country because you were outside of the country at the time. He says he was told by Minister Chabane that you had called and you had said that he must be redeployed, that is Mr. Masego, or his services must be terminated. And he says Mr. Chabane was not happy with this, but he had to carry it out, and he said to him, because I know you are a good, I think, civil servant, he said, I'll try and make a plan for you. And Mr. Masego says he didn't want, Mr. Chabane didn't want to, so to speak, throw him into the street. So I think what Mr. Pretorius is asking is that context. I'm just providing a fuller context. Is whether you have any recollection of you having asked Mr. Chabane to redeploy him. In other words, according to Mr. Masego, from what he was told by Mr. Chabane, the idea that he should be moved from GCIS came from the president and not from Minister Chabane. Are you able to throw any light?
No, I think I have a difficulty with this, that if, let us assume I wanted Masego out.
Yes.
I will wait until I leave the country. And when I'm very far away, then call. It's quite funny. I'm not running a department. Why would I have not talked to Minister Chabane when I was here? Why should I wait until I go? It's a little bit fishy. Now, I don't want to make a point, but I can make a point because this commission has experienced this. At times, people use the names of the president. I'm sure you had a witness here.
Yes, last week.
Which said he was lying. He'd never had any instructions from the president. I'm sure that could happen with the ministers as well. If the minister is finding it difficult to say to the DG, I'm now saying go, and use the name of the president. Because I don't see why I should leave the country. Only when I'm abroad, then I must attend to this issue. It's a little bit strange and funny. And I never phoned Chabani about this DG when I was abroad, not at all.
Yes.
Chair, there's a request to
Yes.
address you.
Thank you. Mr. Skakam.
No, Mr.
Oh, I'm
Tabani.
sorry.
However,
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry.
yes, Mr. Zulu. Chair, we, together with just the legal team, we have a duty to raise concerns
Yes.
when we see a development in the manner in which our client is being cross-examined. Essentially, what is going on now
Yes.
is that Mr. Pretorius is cross-examining Mr. Zuma. He's cross-examining about issues we are not clear about insofar as the terms of reference are concerned. We, as you recall, Mr. Chair, Mr. Zuma has read this affidavit. We have read it. We took the view that it does not implicate the president in any of the terms of reference that this commission is about. That is the attitude we took. Now, of course, in your discretion, you decided the president should come and address and take and give his version of events. What is going on now is not Mr. Pretorius assisting Mr. Zuma to give his version. What he's doing, he's cross-examining him. But which is not a problem. If Mr. Zuma's attitude had been that there are aspects in the statement of Mr. Masego that implicate him in fraud, corruption, and this state capture. We were not able to follow how to fit this cross-examination in which he seeks Mr. Zuma to recall meetings where he was not present, in which he seeks Mr. Zuma to interpret what those meetings meant, or even to give a view of whether those meetings were appropriate or not. It's not fair. If this is if the legal team of the commission wishes to cross-examine Mr. Zuma, it's important that Mr. Zuma is in fact given an opportunity to then reflect with a view that he's going to be cross-examined, to reflect on all these things. Because you say, the rules of the commission say, you look at an affidavit that implicates you or that mentions your name, you make a judgment call on whether or not that the allegations made in that affidavit are of a nature that fit within the investigative powers of the commission, fraud, corruption, and state capture. Now he's being asked to recall phone calls and meetings where he was not present, and to interpret what those meetings would mean. We think it's unfair, because what essentially it means is this. If he cannot say, for example, that he thinks that the meeting between Mr. Gupta, IJ Gupta and Mr. Masego was inappropriate, then you must read something into it. It's not right. If the commission rules, for example, that this line of questioning is the correct line of questioning that must be adopted, it's no longer it's cross-examination. You're trying to prove that Mr. Zuma's private conversation were somehow relevant to his public interaction, or his interaction with the Guptas in public. Give him an opportunity to then look at this with a view that is going to be cross-examined, and then he can prepare adequately for cross-examination. Not what is not this. This would say, in our view, in our assessment as lawyers, is cross-examination for which a witness ought to have been given a fair opportunity to be told that if you are not going to, for example, respond to Mr. Masego, you may nonetheless be called and be cross-examined on what Mr. Masego says. He is being cross-examined on what Mr. Masego says. How can the president be expected to remember meetings where he was not there? Phone calls that occurred years ago. I don't recall phone calls that happened last week. Now, Mr. Zuma must recall conversations that he had with Mr. Masego years ago, and what they may have meant. I think let's be fair and stick to what this commission is about. The terms of reference, bearing in mind that Mr. Zuma's assessment of this affidavit is that it does not implicate him in fraud and corruption. If the Commission's view is that it does, let them put those questions to him. Not ask him to remember meetings and if this affidavit is anywhere says that Mr. Zuma was corrupt in A, B, C, and D, then he must put that to Mr. Zuma because that is exactly within the terms of reference that this commission is about. This line of, we do this often, but we do it to opponents to witnesses whom we are cross-examining. Not witnesses who are supposed to just inquire about information because we expected that the commission would be asking for clarity on certain things. Not pose questions that amount to cross-examination. That is what that's what we thought we would bring to the attention of the committee. Incidentally, we wanted to do that in chambers.
Yes.
But we thought no, actually, it's probably apt to bring it to your attention now,
Yes,
so that if there is a need for us to then regroup and determine how we deal with it, then we deal with it. Because if Mr. Pretorius wants to continue with cross-examination, we waited yesterday because we realized it was actually cross-examination. But we said, no, maybe later on we will see an approach that seeks to establish facts. If Mr. Zuma says, I don't remember that meeting, that should be the end of the matter. Why should it then be asked, oh, but you would have discussed this privately? Where is he taking this to? Terms of reference. In the terms of reference. Let's be loyal to the terms of reference.
Thank you.
That's what we want to put.
I'll hear what Mr. Pretorius has to say. I had a little bit of concern in relation to questions that related to the meeting that Mr. Masego had with the Guptas, which obviously Mr. Zuma did not attend. But with regard to the removal or transfer of Mr. Masego from GCIS to the Department of Public Service and Administration, my recollection is that his statement and or evidence suggested that he was removed from his position as CEO of GCIS because he did not cooperate with the Guptas, and that he was told that by the Minister Chabane that was at the instance of the former president. That's my recollection of what he said. Of course, if one talks about a phone call that happened many years ago, some calls one might recall because of their distinct nature or significance, but some one would not recall. Sometimes one might not even recall a call that happened a few months ago. But my understanding of Mr. Masego's evidence suggested that the Guptas were unhappy that he did not cooperate with them, and that he was removed when there were no grounds to remove him, and that was at the instance, based on what he was told, he said, by Minister Chabane of the former president. But let me hear what Mr.
Sorry,
Yes.
perhaps before you
Yes.
take. Firstly, in relation to what the chairperson has just sketched out, the first point would be this. Mr. Pretorius must say that they are going to bring the Guptas, or whoever they allege in the Guptas, the witness from the Guptas who are going to say that who is going to confirm this interaction that Masego is talking about. Because it is not, you see, Chair, what you said in terms of the terms of reference was that if you are implicated on the issues that are within the terms of reference, then you are going to be given an opportunity to put your version and then put your, and then of course somebody might ask to cross-examine you. Someone might ask to cross-examine you. We didn't get the impression that the evidence leaders here's job would be to cross-examine witnesses. But even on the issue that Masego complains about, that he was fired because, or he was transferred because of some intervention that came from the presidency, that's an issue that he says, we assess it. We say, in terms of the terms of reference, there are no allegations he's making on corruption. If you bring Mr. AJ or any of the Guptas here in the commission, and they say to you, we did speak to Mr. Masego. We in fact told him that we're at the ear of the president, and that if he's not cooperating on this business, we will certainly we'll use that relationship and get him removed. We think it's highly unfair. If the Guptas are not going to be here to testify and to corroborate what Mr. Masego has said here, it's just unfair to ask the president to recall or to interpret what role he may have played in the removal of Mr. Masego. But the other thing, that reason why we did not think that falls within your terms of reference is because it's something that has to do with how government decides to remove people who are employed there, or redeploy them, or transfer them into different units. It is not within, if Mr. Masego's allegation is that there was corruption, he must say so in unequivocal terms, or that his transfer was in pursuance of a corrupt deal. He must say so. It cannot be read through cross-examination, which cross-examination we're not prepared for. Because what we were prepared for, when we were invited by the commission, was for Mr. Zuma to be asked clarity questions, clarification questions, not going through pages and paragraphs and cross-examining him on issues that he has elected to take a position, a legal position, which is that he's not going to get involved in Masego's speculation about what he's meeting with the Guptas, who authorized it, and what else. If Masego is bold enough to say, I was removed because the president was unhappy that I was not doing the right thing, he must say so. And that this right thing that I was being asked to this right thing that I was doing was in accordance with the law, but the president wanted me to do something corrupt. Then we're in the terms of reference. Then we would have said to the president, Mr. President, Mr. Masego says you're corrupt, and this is how he says you're corrupt. And then Mr. President would have said, okay, let me respond. This is my statement. The commission would have a statement answering allegations of corruption or state capture or whatever it is and fraud. If Mr. Masego's accusations of Mr. Zuma amounted to that he was corrupt, there was a fraudulent conduct on his behalf, or that there was something about state capture that one must read in it. You can't, it's not fair to call a former president to come and talk about how an official of government was removed when you are not alleging that there was corruption. Please make the allegation that there was corruption, and then let the president deal with that, or that there was fraud.
Well, you see, when you deal with a case in litigation in court, it's easy to say when you are for one side, the other side must make out its case, because that's litigation. Where it's an inquiry, a person may come and say, this is what I know. I'm placing before the commission what I know and what happened. And the commission must inquire whether that may have anything to do with any impropriety. So while on the one hand there must be fairness, there can be no doubt about that, but one also needs to understand that unlike in litigation where one is able to say, well, that party must make its case clear in the pleadings and in the affidavits. In an inquiry, you have a situation where people say, I'm only here to say what I know. What you make of that in terms of your inquiry, whether you think it's relevant or irrelevant, but this is what I am here to say. So one has got to look at all of that. But
With respect, I understand
yes,
that, Chairperson,
yes.
but even within the Commission of Inquiry, firstly, it would be a misunderstanding if you understood, Mr. Chair, that I was invoking a litigation strategy.
No.
All I'm saying is this,
Yes.
that in the statements that you get, even if a complainant comes here before the Commission and complains, the complaint must be investigated if the allegations that that complaint makes fall within the terms of reference of the Commission. I'm saying we advised Mr. Zuma that Mr. Masego's statement did not accuse him of any corruption or any fraud or any state capture. He's unhappy with some things and all that. What is happening here? And so we said to Mr. Zuma, so we don't think that you should put a statement. So that's why you don't have a statement. In terms of the rules, you are allowed not to put a statement to explain what Mr. Masego says, because he doesn't implicate you in what the commission is about. So Mr. Zuma decides he's not going to put a statement. That is what he has done. But what has happened here is that having taken advantage and used the full right he has in terms of the commission rules, not to respond to a litigant or to a witness who makes allegations that don't amount to corruption. What is happening here is just not what we think should be happening. And that is why, as I say, Chair, we sat there and we thought, no, actually, because he's a guest of the commission, let's see what they really want from him. What information are they looking from him in relation to Mr. Masego? Does he make the allegation of corruption, fraud, and state capture against him, for which he should be called to answer? And that's why we're anxious with these kind of questions. In this kind of forum, a lot can be read from the questions that he reads and from the answers they get. And we do not want this commission to end up in a situation where it's unfair to Mr. Zuma, because it has said to Mr. Zuma, if no one makes allegations of corruption or fraud or state capture, you don't have to put a statement. You don't need to ask Mr. Masego to cross-examine Mr. Masego on it. And he has done that. We accept that you can call him to ask clarity questions. Please ask clarity questions, and not questions that amount to cross-examining, because we're going into credibility when we cross-examine a witness. We're going to credibility. So Mr. Masego is being measured against, his allegations are being measured against Mr. Zuma. And we want to be sure that that is not something that they're trying to invoke the credibility of the witness, and whether he can be trusted for his recollection of what Mr. Masego says. So we're asking the commission to be fair to the extent that it accepts that Mr. Zuma has been called at its instance to seek clarity questions, not to ask questions that amount to cross-examination. And what has been happening is cross-examination.
Let me hear Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to enter into a long debate as to what questioning is and what cross-examination is. Safe to say that there is no pleaded case or charge sheet which we are seeking to validate, or sections of which we're seeking to prove through our questioning. So insofar as it may be alleged that we are seeking to question, to prove a particular pleaded case in a civil matter or a particular criminal case as represented by a charge sheet, that is simply not correct. What we are doing is affording Mr. Zuma a full opportunity to deal with all the factual evidence that Mr. Masego led, and indeed the implications of that evidence. And it would be grossly unfair to Mr. Zuma not to allow him that full opportunity to deal with what might have been said by Mr. Masego, and also what might have been intended by him to have been conveyed. And once Mr. Zuma has dealt with it, as he is dealing with it, I really don't see that we are traversing any rules, but insofar as we are, Chair, you will no doubt pull me up and guide me accordingly, and I'm quite willing to accept such, obviously, such intervention by yourself. The second point is in relation to our assumed obligation to call the Guptas to corroborate Mr. Maseko before questions can be asked. I'm not sure that it's correct at all to say that you can't ask questions about the evidence of one witness until it's been corroborated by another witness. One needn't deal with that issue any further. Thirdly, terms of reference. I understand the argument to be that unless there's a direct allegation of fraud and corruption against Mr. Zuma, we're precluded from entering into this arena. May I just highlight paragraph 1.1 of our terms of reference, which just says, whether and to what extent and by whom attempts were made through any form of inducement or for any gain whatsoever nature to influence. The improper influence of members of the National Executive and the improper influence of Mr. Maseko falls squarely within our terms of reference, and it is only fair to Mr. Zuma in these circumstances to ask him what he knew, if anything, about him, to enable him either to distance himself, as he has to date, completely from that undue influence, or to admit that I did have, because I was in support of the project. It's not unfair to ask Mr. Zuma those questions so he can give his version as to what the import of the evidence of Mr. Maseko might be. And Mr. Maseko's evidence, which we were dealing with now, which gave rise to the objection, at least the timing of the objection, is particular in that what Mr. Maseko says is that following in the context of Mr. Maseko's failure to accede to what may well be argued improper influence, he was fired. And it would be grossly unfair to Mr. Zuma if the legal team were to ask you to make findings in that regard because the evidence was unchallenged and Mr. Zuma hasn't had an opportunity to deal with it. Let me deal with another term of reference, 1.6. It says whether our mandate is to investigate whether there were any irregularities, undue enrichment, corruption, and undue influence in the awarding of contracts, government advertising in the New Age newspaper. So this whole issue of government advertising is particularly highlighted in the terms of reference in relation not only to fraud and corruption, but in relation to any influence that might be argued to be undue. And quite fairly to Mr. Zuma, he commented on that yesterday, saying that the influence sought to be exercised was not entirely proper. He used his own words, I can't recall them at the moment. Sorry. My note. So basically, all one needs to do for the moment and going forward is, in fairness to Mr. Zuma, put to Mr. Zuma the import of what Mr. Maseko has done. I don't have far to go at all, and I submit the line of questioning has been not only proper but necessary in order to ensure that in relation to all the evidence, its import, Mr. Zuma has a fair opportunity to deal with it. I have never said to Mr. Zuma, I put it to you, as cross-examiners who featured prominently on TV in the past have done, that you are wrong and this is the version that we seek to prove.
Yes, you would like to
In the tradition of Audi,
Yes.
I like Mr. Pretorius respond to some of
Yes.
the things that he says.
Yes.
Firstly, Chair, what is astonishing for us is that this commission clearly was created around the work that the president had done. We have not received a single invitation from the evidence leaders for them to interview Mr. Zuma privately, as they've done with the other witnesses. To say to Mr. Zuma, we would like you to give us a view of what's going on here and to explain certain things, which is what they've done. Mr. Zuma is not being treated the same way that other ministers who have appeared here, who appear to be witnesses of the commission. A decent way of dealing with this, and I don't mean disrespect to the commission or to the commission leaders, would have been to say he's a major witness of what they are investigating. Let us talk to him first. Let us understand what statement we can get from him, because then it's easier to lead him, as they have led other witnesses, other ministers they've led here in the commission. They have led them because they've been able to put together a statement from them with evidence, and therefore they can take the minister through the aspects. Why has Mr. Zuma been brought in this manner, if it was not to cross-examine him? So I'm saying, in respect to Mr. He says, well, you know, this is not a criminal charge. We're not proving a charge. We're not in civil trial. He's simplifying the issues. He knows that what's going on here is of interest to the criminal law enforcement processes. He knows that. Why is he diminishing the value of this process by saying nothing? We don't have a charge sheet. We're not trying to prove a civil claim. In fact, it's not right. And now that I know what his views are on this issue, it is not right the way he wants to carry on with this. The decent thing to have done, if this was a commission witness, as others have been commission witnesses, the decent way to have done it is to say, you are at the helm of the executive that we are looking at. We would like to talk to you about it. They address a letter to Mr. Mancha. Mr. Mancha would say, okay guys, we'll talk to the president. You come and see him at Nkandla. He will tell you exactly what you want. They then create a statement, as they have done with other ministers. Why have they done it this way? So I'm saying, yes, let's be fair. In fact, when he says it would be unfair to Mr. Zuma, that's really a statement that I think should not be dignified. Because what is fair to Mr. Zuma is to be treated in accordance with the spirit and the purpose of this commission. It is not in the spirit of this commission to come here and to say, well, it's in the terms of reference that you can investigate anything. What is just read here specifically says, it is specific. It requires that a witness makes an allegation that there is fraud and corruption. It's not left to speculation. And in fact, they could have sorted out most of these things that they're asking now, if they'd done what they'd done with the other ministers. If they'd gone to him and said, look, I mean, we now are in the middle of a commission you established. We would like to hear what you say about some of the things that have come up. We'll then do a statement, and then we're going to bring it to the commission, and then we're going to lead the evidence, not cross-examine you. So what are we meant to do with this? It's not right. We would suggest that you seriously consider that proposal of asking them to talk to him about the things that they want, to then make a statement, if they want to make a statement, and then to lead him properly. This is cross-examination, and his legal team, we cannot sit there and he can say whatever he wants to say. A cross-examination question is not practice, and he's more senior than I am. It's not practice that you say, I put it to you. That's not how we identify whether this is a cross-examination or not. The fact that it doesn't say, I put it to you, doesn't mean that the question is not a cross-examination question. There are serious credibility issues that he's pursuing here that we're concerned about. This is not how we envisage that this commission intends to pursue this issue. Would seriously urge, Chair, that you consider asking them to see if they cannot have a conversation with the president about these issues, so they have a statement from him, not to simply spring things from him, that the way in which they are conducting themselves. That's why I asked the question, why has he been brought here in this manner? Why has he not been firstly invited to bring a statement? Because they can do that. They cannot tell us that when the ministers that they brought here were firstly implicated on paper, and then of course, they must have consulted with them. He can correct me if I'm wrong. A statement was created, and then, of course, you've got their statements here. Mr. Zuma doesn't have a statement created by the evidence leaders. Why is that so?
Yes. Thank you. I think what I would like to do is that we take the tea break, and at the end of the tea break, may I see counsel on both sides in my temporary chambers here. Can I see both counsel on both sides, and just to try and see if we may at least achieve a common understanding as to where the concerns are and whether there is a way of resolving them in terms of the way forward without me having to make any ruling.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. We'll take the tea adjournment now. It's about 22 minutes past 11. I think let us aim to resume at 12 to give ourselves time for tea and time for the meeting that I must have with counsel on both sides.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn. My meeting with counsel on both sides took longer than I had anticipated. That is why we were not able to resume at 12. However, I'm happy to say that the meeting that I've had with counsel from both sides has been a very constructive and fruitful meeting. The discussion that I had with counsel from both sides has resulted in an agreement that I do not need to make any ruling on the concerns or objections that had been raised. A way has been found to try and minimize any prospects of any feeling of unfairness. Counsel for the former president have indicated that they do not wish to be seen as if they are obstructive by rising very often and raising objections whenever there might be something that they are concerned about. They have said that they wish Mr. Pretorius to be able to ask questions without having to look over his shoulders whether they are rising to object or not. It's been agreed that because they do not intend to do that, I will try and be more ready to intervene in case I think there is unfairness in any question. But it's been agreed that we can proceed. I don't need to make a ruling. Mr. Pretorius from his side will try and find a way to put questions in a manner that will take account of any concerns that he may think may create unfairness. So we are going to proceed, and Mr. Zuma's counsel have indicated that they will really raise an objection if it's something that's quite serious, but otherwise they intend to try and allow the proceedings to flow as much as possible. So we'll proceed on that basis, and I just wish to thank counsel from both sides for their constructive approach to resolving the issue that we have resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Zuma, may we proceed then? Thank you. You have before you copies of the statements that have been enlarged. I hope that is more convenient for you, and that we may continue our engagement. Thank you. What I would like to put to you in relation to the evidence of Mr. Maseko is simply what he told the chair in his evidence, so that you have an opportunity to respond to it, and the import of what his evidence is, so that you also have an opportunity to respond to that. And if I may ask you to look at paragraph 47 and 48 on page 9. What Mr. Maseko says is that he was told by Mr. Chabani that he had been instructed by the President, that is yourself, to redeploy me or terminate my contract henceforth. You've already told the Chair, I understand, that you gave no such instruction, and you explained how it would come about in the ordinary course that a Director General may have his employment terminated at the hands of the reporting minister. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Right. He then says in paragraph 48, he told me, that is, Minister Chabani told Mr. Maseko, that although he had no choice but to implement the instruction from the President, he made a commitment not to throw me in the street because he knew I was a committed civil servant who had not done anything wrong. The essence of that statement by Mr. Maseko is that he was told by Minister Chabani that he had been a committed civil servant who had not done anything wrong. Do you have any response or comment about that?
No, I don't know that message. I never gave an instruction to that effect.
Yes. What is being said, I think, by Mr. Maseko is that as far as Minister Chabani was concerned, he had not done anything wrong. Do you know anything about that statement and Mr. Chabani's attitude?
No. I think, as I said earlier, at that time there was shifting of the DGs between the departments for a variety of reasons, so I never issued any instruction.
Then over the page on page 10, there's reference to a cabinet meeting. And what Mr. Maseko says in paragraph 49 is, during the course of the cabinet meeting, I was informed that ETV News Channel was running with the news story that I was fired. Paragraph 50, during the tea break, I brought this to the attention of Minister Chabani, who was shocked that the matter of my imminent exit was somehow leaked to the media. Then 51, Minister Chabani consulted with the President during the break, and an impromptu announcement had to be made to Cabinet that I had been terminated as GCIS CEO and government spokesperson. That is evidence which relates to a direct consultation or evidence of a direct consultation between Minister Chabani and yourself during a cabinet meeting relating to an announcement that, in effect, that Mr. Maseko had been fired. Do you recall anything about that incident, or that alleged incident?
No, I recall that. The minister coming to me, reporting this, and as always, then they were going to respond to the newspaper. It was just informing me.
Did Minister Chabani give you any background to the, and I use the word firing advisedly because it's used in the statement, of Mr. Maseko?
No, he didn't give me, he did not discuss the matter in terms of the background. He was just saying they've got to deal with this matter, because at that time, there was a shifting of the DGs, but it did not discuss the causes as to why the other DG was going this way. What was concerned with at the time was to correct the impression that was being given by the media, that has been sacked, that no, it's being shifted to another department.
Did you know of the transfer then, because that is dealt with in the remainder of page 10 of Mr. Maseko to the post of Director General at the Department of Public Service and Administration.
Yes, yes.
Was that part of any decision that you made?
No, the decision was made by the cabinet.
By the cabinet. Let me just give you an opportunity to comment, Mr. Zuma, on the import of the statement of Mr. Maseko. Mr. Maseko, his evidence is that an improper approach was made to him to ensure that the full budget of the various departments for government advertising was allocated in favor of the New Age newspaper. That's his evidence. And what he at least seeks to conclude from his statement is that at the very least he was punished for not cooperating as he was requested to do by Mr. A.J. Gupta. And in quoting the Minister Chabani as he does in his statement, he attributes the decision to dismiss or transfer, whatever that decision was, to yourself. Do you have any comment on that?
No. I was not the cause of his being shifted. No.
If we may move on then
maybe
to-
before that, and is it something you have quite a clear recollection of, that you didn't cause him to be shifted? It would have been a request from his minister.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to go to page 17, if I may, and that is the statement of Ms. Mentor. Now, I'm mindful of certain comments made, Chair, yesterday about the evidence of Ms. Mentor, whether it was reliable or credible in any sense, and whether it would in those circumstances be fair to Mr. Zuma to put anything about what Ms. Mentor said. From the legal team's point of view, firstly, that is what was presaged in the correspondence, but that's a formality. It needs to be emphasized that no finding has yet been made about the credibility and reliability of her testimony. That is a matter for later consideration and decision by yourself, Chair. Having heard all the evidence and having given everybody who's concerned an opportunity to talk. So whatever may be said about her evidence, its cogency or otherwise, it's incumbent upon us, I understand, nevertheless to put her version to Mr. Zuma for his comment.
Yes.
In summary, Mr. Zuma, what Ms. Mentor testified to was that a member of the Gupta family offered, and I use that word advisedly, in inverted commas, because whether it was an offer or not, I will deal with in a moment. A ministerial position in exchange for favoring the commercial interests of the Guptas, and that she goes further. She says that that offer, insofar as it was an offer, was made with the knowledge and approval of yourself. Now we can go through it bit by bit. There are other surrounding aspects of her evidence that I can put to you, I should put to you briefly, in fairness, but that is the essence of her evidence. Do you want to answer it at a general level, or shall we go into the detail?
No, I had no interaction with this witness, nothing.
Right. She says in paragraph 16 to 21 of her evidence, or of her statement rather, that she occupied the position as chair of a portfolio committee on public enterprises. She said she was, and she uses the word elected as chairperson of the portfolio committee on public enterprises in 2004. And that in 2010 she was removed from this position. And again, what she says is that in her opinion, the reasons for her removal were twofold: that she refused to meet with yourself on that China state visit, which I think you would recall, because it's central to her evidence. Let's just place that evidence properly in its context. There was a visit to China at a stage at which you were present. She says that there was a request that she meet with you and that she refused. Do you recall anything about that?
I know nothing about it.
She says that another reason for her removal as chairperson of the portfolio committee was that she refused to assist in the closure of the SAA, South African Airways route to India. Do you know anything about that issue?
No, I know nothing about that.
She does say that she was taken to task in relation to the China trip because Transnet actually paid for that visit, and she was taken to task for that.
Who paid for the
Transnet.
trip? Transnet?
Yes. But do you know anything about that issue?
No, I know nothing about it.
Well, wouldn't that be a parliamentary issue in the National Assembly?
Yes. Well, it may be put that that was the real reason, and that's why I'm...
Yes, no, what I'm saying is the
It
action...
is a parliamentary issue.
Yeah, which would not involve the presidency.
No, but in fairness to the President, I felt it in order to remind him that many people say that that was the reason and not the other reasons. Then she talks at paragraph 26 and following, Mr. Zuma, of the visit to China. And she said that she traveled to China in her capacity as portfolio committee chair of public enterprises. Do you yourself recall that visit to China? It was in and about August 2010. I know there may have been plenty of visits, and it's...
Well, shouldn't you just give him more details? I think it was said it was a state visit, but the way you put it, it's like whether he recalls Ms. Mentor's visit to China.
Yes, it was a state visit, and in fact there was a state banquet, according to her evidence, in China in August 2010. A large contingent of South African officials, parliamentarians, government officials, executive members apparently attended, including she says the Guptas. And she said at that visit, the Guptas played a prominent role or an organizational role in the visit. Do you recall anything of that nature?
No, I don't. I don't.
Well, maybe let's say, I'm sorry, do you recall a state visit that you may have made to China? Was it 2011?
2010.
2010.
Or about August 2010.
Well, I've gone to China several times.
Yes.
I might have to look at my records.
You might not recall
Yeah, I
that
may not
in that
recall.
year you had one or not, but you have had a few of them, a few state visits there.
Yeah, because I've gone to China a number of times.
Yes,
If I don't check my records,
yes.
I won't be
You
able
won't
to
be
be
able to
exact
say.
and give the exact answer.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Would you recall any state visit at which the Guptas were present, played any role whatsoever?
No, I don't. I don't remember them in any state visit.
Would that have happened to your knowledge, given your knowledge of the Guptas and
No,
state
I
visits
say-
and the like?
No, I've just answered to say I don't remember. Them
Don't
being
remember.
a part of our visit and taking prominent role, what would they be doing? Was it got nothing to do with the visit?
When you have a state visit, wouldn't the president normally invite South African business people to join for purposes of promoting trade with the country to which the visit is intended?
Yes, that happens, but
That happens.
no one of those business people will play a prominent role in the visit.
Yes.
They meet other business people. In fact, if you go like that, only once you go to address them together with the president of that country.
Yes.
Come in, you address, you go away.
Yes.
They don't participate in the activities.
In the state,
of
with
the
the
visit,
state.
yeah.
Yes. So they meet their counterparts
Yes.
and discuss business, but they
Definitely.
don't become part of the state
Not at all.
activities.
Not at
Okay.
all.
She also said in her statement, Mr. Zuma, that on the evening of the state banquet in China, she was approached by a gentleman who told her that you wished to meet with her at the Chinese presidential guest house. Do you have any comment or recollection in regard to that?
No, nothing of that nature.
She, of course, assumed that the man who spoke to her was one of the Gupta brothers.
She assumes that. Well, it's her who saw the person.
She assumed that.
I know nothing about it.
Then, in paragraph 59, if you would turn to that, please, Mr. Zuma.
Page 59,
59. Paragraph 59, I'm sorry.
paragraph 59.
The first thing she says there is that she had been trying for some time to meet with you regarding the pebble bed modular reactor, amongst other things. Do you know anything about her attempts to meet with you about that issue?
No, nothing.
She says, too, that she communicated with Ms. Lakela Kaunda, who at the time she thought was your personal assistant, in order to secure such a meeting. If we could take that step by step. Did Ms. Kaunda work in your office?
Yeah, Ms. Kaunda worked in my office.
And who whose responsibility would it have been to make arrangements to meet with you?
Not Kaunda. Kaunda
Not
had nothing
Kaunda.
to do with that.
Right.
There are other officials who were dealing with those kind of arrangements, not Kaunda.
She says that one evening on a Sunday in or around October 2010, and in fairness to you, that version changed to September, I think, or times other than October 2010. She said she received a telephone call from Ms. Kaunda to say that you could see her the following day. Do you recall anything of that?
No.
One second, Mr. Pretorius. Lerat. Ask her to ask the referent to switch on the Thank you.
In any event, what she then said in her evidence, and I'm moving to paragraph 63, she said that she would be met at the airport in Johannesburg and taken to a place where she would meet with you. I understand from what you have said is that you don't recall any interaction with Ms. Kaunda at all.
No.
So the details of that interaction not necessary
Not at
to
all.
deal with in any.
Not at all.
Yes, and sorry, I might have made an error. No interaction with Ms. Mentor.
No,
Yes.
not at all.
She then says that she was picked up at the airport, taken to a certain business premises, Sahara Computers, and then taken to what has become known as the Saxonwold compound. She says there that in the course of events that morning, A.J. Gupta told her that you knew of this meeting, but I take it that consistent with your previous answers, that's not a
Absolutely,
matter
I knew
that you
nothing.
can comment on. Various issues then were discussed in that meeting, but at a stage, she says, firstly, that there would be a cabinet reshuffle in the next week or so. Do you know of a cabinet reshuffle in October 2010, for example, and if I could help you there, the cabinet reshuffle where Minister Gigaba was appointed to replace Minister Hogan? That happened around October 2010, as we understand it.
Yeah, there was a shuffle, I think. In terms of reshuffle that happens regularly when it has to happen.
If she is to be believed at all, and I qualify that, what I'm to put to you on that basis, it appears that A.J. Gupta would have known of a cabinet reshuffle to occur at the end of October. Now, in that regard, you did say earlier that there is a consultation process that happens before a cabinet reshuffle. Could someone like A.J. Gupta have known of such a reshuffle from
No.
your own knowledge?
No. Ajay Gupta was not part of government.
No, I
was
understand.
not even part of the people who normally get consulted.
So your response to that evidence is not that he might have known, but that simply the probabilities are that he didn't know. So I
He
understand.
shouldn't have known.
I guess maybe let's ask it this way. Before a reshuffle would happen, would there be people with whom you would have consultation that would know before it happens?
Yes, definitely. I consult very
Yes.
selected and a few people. I
Yes,
always consult.
yes,
At no stage I could do the reshuffle without people knowing who are supposed to know. For an example, it would be the top 6, for an example, they would have to know what I'm doing.
that is the top 6 of
Top 6
the
of the
ANC.
yes.
Yes,
As well as, if it is, all of it, as well as the alliance top 6 or 5. Those are the
Yes.
people we consult with.
yes,
So it wouldn't be the knowledge that is on me only. There would be
yes,
those kind of individuals who would know.
yes.
Yes.
And I guess that the best you can say is that you didn't tell him or you wouldn't have told him, but you can't know what anyone else who might have known might have done.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
AJ Gupta, according to the statement at least, the written statement that you have before you, said to her two things, and I'm referring to paragraph 91, if you want to go there, Mr. Zuma.
Paragraph 91.
Said he would put in a word with the president for me. And then he said, we usually do.
I'm sorry, what page, what paragraph?
Paragraph 91.
Okay.
So what she said, that's Ms. Mentor, is, and perhaps for the sake of accuracy, I should read paragraph 90,
Okay.
because the status of the offer may be debated. Paragraph 90, she said, immediately after, and she's now referring to the discussion between herself and Mr. A.J. Gupta, immediately after his statements about SAA's India route, A.J. Gupta then very casually and much to my astonishment proceeded to offer me the position of Minister of Public Enterprises if I would agree to facilitate the closure of SAA's India route when I became minister. A.J. Gupta said there would be a cabinet reshuffle in the next week or so, and he said he had an offer for me. He said that I could be the next Minister of Public Enterprises if I agreed to facilitate the closure of the route. But the import of her statement is qualified, and in fairness, that qualification should be put to you. She goes on in paragraph 91 to say, it is an understatement to say that I was shocked by the offer. I was stunned and wondered how A.J. Gupta had so much power. I responded firstly by informing him that the SAA statistics showed that the flight to India was doing very well. Secondly, I asked how he could be in a position to offer me a position as a minister. A.J. Gupta said he would put in a word for the president for me. After this statement, there was silence in the room, after which A.J. stated, we usually do. I perceived his tone to be boastful. I then asked him who we was, but he did not respond. So although she concludes that an offer was made, it seems that what she does say is that A.J. Gupta said he would put in a word with the president for me. I'm not sure whether that was a firm offer or not, but the question then arises about what she says is that A.J. Gupta informed her that he had communications with you in which he would suggest who should be appointed as a minister. So that's the import of her evidence. Rather than offer.
I think I pressed the wrong one.
May I conclude the question, or do you want to interrupt?
No, I wanted to say, I think what you put to Mr. Zuma as the essence of what Ms. Mento is saying might not be accurate. My understanding is that what you read says, Ms. Mento says, Mr. Gupta said to her, he would put in a word for her to the president for her to get the ministerial position. But you said she said there was communication, which might suggest there had been prior communication.
No.
I don't know if that is there, but that's what I heard.
No, let me make it clear.
Yeah.
In fairness to all concerned, she says two things. In paragraph 90, she said, he made me an offer. A.J. Gupta made me an offer of a presidential position. She qualifies this somewhat in her next paragraph to say, he would put in a word with the president for me. So her evidence is to the effect that A.J. Gupta said that he would suggest to you or advise or try to persuade or however communicate with you in relation to her future appointment as a Minister of Public Enterprises. So what I'm attempting to put to you is the import of the statement that A.J. Gupta said he would put in a word with yourself in her favor. Any response to that? Is that clear?
I don't know what could be my response because they were discussing two of them.
Yes.
Had nothing to do with it.
No, I understand.
Absolutely.
But
I think maybe the question should be, was your relationship with Mr. A.J. Gupta, to your knowledge, such that he could make suggestions to you as to who should be appointed minister?
No, not at all. It had nothing to do with what happens in government.
so for clarity's sake, the question put to you is not to comment on what was said between them and to interpret the conversation that happened between them, but merely to raise the factual question arising out of that, that Mr. Gupta appeared, according to Ms. Mentor, to be of the opinion that he could talk to you about ministerial appointments. That's the question. It's been rephrased by the chair. And is that correct or not correct? You have an opportunity to deal with that allegation.
No. That's why I'm saying, discussing two of them about either offering whatever, other one being surprised. I'm not there. I don't know why they reached that kind of a discussion.
Then I haven't made myself clear, and perhaps the chair needs to rephrase his question as well. The question is not what happened or what is interpreted about a conversation at which you were not present. The question is, did Mr. Gupta ever speak to you about an appointment into a ministerial position?
No, never.
She then continues in her statement to say that at that stage she became angry, began to speak very loudly, and she had become what she refers to as confrontational, and I'm referring to paragraph 92. And it was at that moment, she says, that you entered the room and that she immediately informed you of the quote-unquote offer that had been made, and that you didn't react to that communication but tried to calm her down. That is the essence of what she says in the remaining paragraphs. I'm not sure.
No, there's nothing of that nature. I know nothing of entering some room.
Have you ever been at the Gupta residence at the same time as her?
No,
No.
never.
Do you recall who Miss Mento is?
Yes, I
you do
recall.
recall, yeah.
Yes, I recall. I know her.
Yes, I'm asking because I think at a certain stage there seems to have been something from the presidency that suggested that at that time you did not recall who she was. So that's why I'm asking. But you say you do recall her.
No, I do recall her.
Okay,
I do recall her.
okay.
Well, perhaps, again, to afford you an opportunity to respond, on page 54, and Chair,
Are you moving away from that
no, I'm
incident?
going exactly to that
Oh.
point. We got 5, PM 5. Again, MPM 5 on page 54 is illegible, so it's not of any use to anybody, but I do want to refer to a better version of that document. Give it to me. Give it to me. A more direct route this time, Chair.
Have you got a clearer copy for counsel for Mr. Zuma?
Yes.
You say that is a better version of the document at page 54.
It may be that I should afford time to consult. It is 1 o'clock. I don't know when you intend taking the
Yeah, we can take the adjournment now.
long adjournment.
Okay, let's take the lunch adjournment now.
And then the
The-
matter can be discussed in the
You
meanwhile.
can discuss the matter, yeah. We'll take the lunch adjournment now and resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
What was the media
I don't know.
Because basically what they're going to put is that the office said you don't.
No, when first,
Yeah, give them the... Sorry?
Do I still want you to stay for?
Yeah. I do. Thank you. We never know what crops up, and it's important that you are part of the development of the narrative. Otherwise, you come in and then
Okay, I understand. I'm going to give him a of the other annexures as well, yeah?
All of them.
Pass a message to you for an answer. You need the whole secretariat team here every day. There's one person enough.
We can always relay messages across, because we never have secretariat here for all. So we can always, runners also. No idea. Ian Gillingham.